Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. The Zanu-PF government tires of telling us that we are doing well. I think Zimbabweans have heard that story ever since the country attained its independence. In the 1980s, Mugabe never tired of telling the people of Gutsa ruzhinji mass prosperity. The truth of the matter is this has been a mirage, and we've been chasing it for the last 44 years. That is a long time to be chasing a mirage. We need to grow up and realize that a mirage is an illusion. Zimbabwe's economic situation, all the indicators show that the country is in serious economic trouble. Why the regime keeps telling us that we are doing well beggars belief. This is a map of the various African countries. According to the World Bank. These are the 5 top African countries at risk of sovereign debt. That means government failing to pay its debt. Zimbabwe, Zambia, the Republic of Congo, Sudan, and Eritrea. Others were coming very close: Mozambique, Somalia, and Egypt. And Libya. The risk rating scale, the one with the lowest in Africa, is Botswana. South Africa, Namibia are moderate. Zimbabwe is red. Zimbabwe is desperately seeking IMF and World Bank financial support, which is unlikely to come, though, due to its massive arrears to the IMF, World Bank, African Development Bank, Paris Club, and the European Investment Bank. What I think most people find so shocking and disappointing about Zimbabwe is the country itself probably would not be needing loans if we managed our resources properly. A few years ago, the then Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe admitted, John Mnangagwa, the one who just been succeeded now, admitted that if Zimbabwe stemmed out corruption, it would generate enough wealth to pay off its debt, and from there on be able to pay for its own development needs. He estimated as far back as 2019 that the country was losing as much as 80% of its gold earnings through smuggling. This figure has since been confirmed by the Al Jazeera documentary last year on the gold mafia. Zimbabwe has the resources. We're not managing them well. That is the tragedy with Zimbabwe. We've just done a video talking about a report in the Herald, the country's government-controlled flagship carrier newspaper, boasting about how the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission has identified $7 billion of cash and properties, which it was now fighting to recover. A close examination of that 7 billion clearly shows that this probably is the ears of the hippo. Because if we are losing 80% of the $2 billion gold industry per year, then we are losing 1.6 billion US dollars per year. And for this Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission to be recovering only 7 billion in 7 years, it means it's recovering only 1 billion per year. That is miserable. It's not even able to recover what is being looted every year from gold alone. And yet, there are other avenues for looting. Diamonds, lithium, platinum, and so forth. Zimbabwe is not going to have this vision 2030 that Mnangagwa keeps wittering about. It's not going to happen. The country is in serious debt. Corruption is rampant. We need in Zimbabwe to seriously start thinking of how the country is going to get out of this mess. We can listen to Mnangagwa just as we listened to Mugabe before him. He will never admit failure. He will always be promising us that development and prosperity is just around the corner, when in reality it's not. This is from the World Bank. As you can see, there it starts in 1980 and is comparing Zimbabwe gross domestic product per person in 1980, or roughly 1980, I think, with the rest of sub-Sahara Africa. As you can see, Zimbabwe, we started with our GDP per person at around 1,580 or thereabout. And it surged the first few years, and they started coming down again, coming up, and coming down again. And we had our best GDP just before the turn of the century. And then it started to drop. I can say that that peak probably would coincide with the Black Friday when Zanu-PF paid $50,000 unbudgeted to all veterans, war veterans. And the next dip there, 2000, was when the country, when Mugabe started seizing white-owned farms to give mostly to his cronies. And that started the nosedive. That was to continue dropping the country's GDP per person to almost half of what it was at the time of our independence. Just over $800 per person. This is also when we hit hyperinflation. Inflation was 500 billion%. It was impossible to do any meaningful business then. The shops were empty because how can you go and order something, pay for it, come back, sell it, and expect you to go back and buy the same stuff with the money you've earned? The money was losing its value so quickly that whatever you sold yesterday, if you would try to buy it back, you only get half of what you got. That's how much money was losing its value. Losing half of its value overnight sometimes. It was impossible to do business. After the GNU, that's when the economies started to recover again. At the end of it, the certainty set in again. And as we can see there, it has been dropping ever since, I suppose, the military coup in 2017 there. As much as Mnangagwa would want to convince us that the economy is doing well, that we are on course to achieve his vision 2030, when the country will be an upper middle income country, the truth of the matter is the country is not performing well. Economy is in serious trouble. And we've got to wake up to that reality, that things are not going on well. We can't keep on pretending that we'll wake up some morning and we'll find ourselves an upper middle income nation. That's not going to happen. As long as we've got a pariah state, corrupt, incompetent, murderous thugs, we've managed to remain in power by rigging elections. Zimbabwe's economy is not going to recover. And I think we really need to start putting our house in order. In my view, the only meaningful change would come if we implement the democratic reforms and end this case of rigged elections and bad governance. I'll never get tired of reminding the Zimbabweans that the country cannot afford another rigged election in 2028. Yes, we should start thinking of 2028 now and not wait for another year or two, and then it will be too late to do anything about it anyway. We should start thinking about it now. What can be done? I believe ideally what we can do is get the democratic reform implemented so that 2028 will be free, fair, and credible elections. But I have to admit it that that is not likely to happen, given that Zanu-PF has got the majority in parliament, and thanks to the implosion in CCC, it now has got a super majority in parliament. And the opposition that is there is in Zanu-PF's pockets, let's be honest. Zanu-PF is in the driving seat right now, and I don't see the regime implementing the reforms. What Zanu-PF will be counting on is that come 2028, the opposition will once again participate in the flawed elections to give Zanu-PF the majority in parliament, win the presidency, and most significant of all, political legitimacy. Just as they've done in 2018, they've done last year. If we can get Zanu-PF to implement reforms, and I believe we cannot do so, the next best option is to make sure that Zanu-PF does not get political legitimacy in 2028. We have got somehow to get through to some of the CCC wildebeest head who were easily in 2018 to participate in flawed elections, even when they were warned that participating will only give Zanu-PF legitimacy. They repeated the same mistake last year. Nearly 2 million Zimbabweans voted for Nelson Chamisa last year because he had promised that CCC was going to win big, and CCC had their plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. But of course, any close examination of that immediately revealed that Chamisa was just lying. The tragedy is the people of Zimbabwe have not learned from that. Right now, Chamisa is, although he has abandoned his CCC party, complaining that it had been infiltrated by Zanu-PF, is preparing to launch another party. And the 2 million CCC blind followers are ready to pick up their bags and follow him again. We cannot afford to have this meaningless cycle of rigged elections, knowing fully well they are rigged, only to give Zanu-PF legitimacy. We have got to learn from the past. But unfortunately, they're not very good at that. Our friends, the Triple C supporters, have got what I call the boxer, the horse in animal farm mentality. While they have failed to understand the issues at stake, they have willingly accepted Chamisa as their leader and now have committed themselves to following him no matter what. In the book Animal Farm, Boxer was the horse who could not even master how to learn more than 4 letters of the alphabet. It took him just as long to learn the first 4 letters as other animals took to learn all the 26. And when he moved on to the next 4, it took him just as long again to learn those 4. By the time he had mastered them, it was that he had forgotten the first 4. And whoever was teaching him gave up. And he, Boxer himself, gave up. Boxer could not get one coherent idea of his own. And so he gave up. He decided he was going to trust and believe in whatever Napoleon, the pig, who was the leader, said or did. And so he adopted this motto, Comrade Napoleon is always right. Whatever Napoleon said, Boxer could never, would defend that position, even if he cannot articulate why it is correct. And had closed his ears to being told why it may be wrong. But when you've got people like that, that is dangerous. A lot of the Chamisa supporters have that mentality. Try to convince them that Chamisa and company sold out on democratic reforms these last 23 years, including the 5 during the GNU, has achieved nothing. They really do not understand what the reforms are, much less how they were to be implemented. And so they cannot blame Chamisa for failing to implement something that they don't even know what it is. But nonetheless, the country cannot afford this blind loyalty to Chamisa. Chamisa has got his own agenda. He was hell-bent on participating in 2018 because, like the rest of his MDC friends, they realized that if you participate, Zanu-PF will give you a few gravy train seats. And that is what they were after. This is a quotation from David Coulthard's book. And the essence of it is this: that the 2013 electoral process was so flawed, so illegal, that the only logical step was to withdraw. But when he tried to tell his colleagues in the opposition to withdraw, there were no takers. And so they all participated in the 2013 elections, because as Coulthard rightly says in this quotation, such was the mistrust between the MDC-T and MDC-N that neither would withdraw for fear the other would remain and win all the seats. So they've been participating in these flawed elections out of greed, pure and simple. The truth is, Zimbabwe cannot afford another rigged election. And yet Chamisa will participate in 2028 for the same reason that he participated last year, the same reason he participated in 2018, same reason he participated in 2013, and indeed the same reason he and his friends failed to implement even one meaningful reform during the GNU. Zimbabwe cannot afford that anymore. The trouble with having a corrupt, tyrannical regime is that even the world, the international community, is becoming loath at helping us. There have been instances when the international community has given help, aid for a specific purpose. Like this year, for instance, Zimbabwe is facing serious food shortages. But the international community will be loath to help Zimbabwe because they also know that you give the regime the money. It will not be the first time that the money is diverted for other purposes. Last week, the Vice President Chiwenga was in Iran. And there have been reports that Zimbabwe is planning to buy weapons from Iran. How many international communities, donors, and so forth would be sick in the stomach if they were to give Zimbabwe help to buy food, only to later on learn that the money was used to buy weapons? But that wouldn't be the first time that such a thing has happened. That is Zimbabwe for you. I think the problem of solving Zimbabwe's political mess has become more urgent now than ever before. Zimbabwe is not getting out of this mess without paying attention to the problem of rigged elections. Because as long as Zanu-PF is able to rig the elections, the regime will stay in power. Particularly if they're able to rig the elections, get the opposition to con the people to participate and give the regime legitimacy. We cannot stop the regime rigging the elections because we can't implement the reforms. The least we can do is make sure that people do not participate in the flawed elections to give the regime legitimacy. I think that is possible. I think we need to start seriously thinking about that. Before I close, I'll just show one comment here from one of the listeners out there. It's Faith Ndlovu. Says, you with your nauseating blaming If you can't leave the comfort of the diaspora and go lead the way you want to see, then shut up. Aren't you a man too? Chamisa, that Chamisa, this. Well, that may well be the case. It's not to say that Chamisa failed or MDC failed to implement reform. It's not blaming, it's stating the truth. I think the main problem we tend to have in Zimbabwe is that we really have failed to appreciate the subtle difference between those in power must be held to account. And the minute you try to hold those in power to account, their supporters think it is their duty to defend their leader. Democracy works if the citizens are educated, knowledgeable of the issues, and are diligent enough to hold those in power to account. And defending somebody out of blind loyalty is not helping our democratic process. I'll readily admit that I'm nauseating blaming. If you can give me one democratic reform that MDC Triple C implemented in the last 23 years, including the 5 in the GNU. If they did not, then I'm speaking the truth. And we should hold them to account. I think this tendency of saying, oh, those people in the diaspora should say nothing is mistake. It's a big mistake. I think those in the diaspora will continue to show an interest in what is happening in Zimbabwe. I salute them. It will be tempting to say, I'm in the diaspora, I've escaped the tragedy that is happening in Zimbabwe, and I wash my hands of it. That would be tempting. But those who have said, no, the situation in Zimbabwe is intolerable, and in fact, for some of them, they've got a better opportunity to understand what is happening than those who are in the country. The opportunity, for instance, to have this live stream is easier for me in the diaspora than it is for many people who are in Zimbabwe. I think we need to focus on the issues and stop this mentality that somehow anyone who has left the country has nothing to contribute. Quality of your contribution to solving Zimbabwe's problem must be judged purely on its merit, not where you come from, where you are living, your gender, your race, or whatever. Those are irrelevant. I repeat, MDC Triple C had the golden opportunity to implement the democratic reforms. The truth is, they failed to do so. They've been participating in these flawed elections to give Zanu-PF legitimacy. That is the reality. That is why we are in this mess. I believe SADC would have denied Zanu-PF political legitimacy last year, for instance, after those rigged elections, if MDC guys and the rest of the opposition had not participated in those elections, particularly MDC, who ended up with 44% of the cast vote, according to SEC. And I don't think they would have granted Zanu-PF political legitimacy if Zimbabweans had made the obvious decision of, no, we are not going to continue participating in these flawed elections. Instead, they were conned into believing that CCC was going to win big. And so 2 million of them participated. Whether we like it or not, or whether we care to admit it or not, the truth is SADC leaders, at least even those who wanted to deny Zanu-PF legitimacy, found it very difficult. If the people of Zimbabwe themselves are participating in these numbers in a flawed process, which they've been warned is flawed, and yet they still participate, who are we to say, no, the process is flawed, Zanu-PF should be denied legitimacy? We need to be rational in our thinking. The problem of Zimbabwe is not going to be solved by burying our heads in the sand and have this boxer mentality that our leader is somehow infallible, untouchable. I have argued on this platform that MDC CCC, the number one task that was set for them to do by the people of Zimbabwe, was to implement the democratic reforms to stop Zanu-PF breaking the elections. We must hold the opposition to account for how they performed on that task. To keep on saying, no, Zanu-PF is the one in government. Yes, if we're talking of corruption, we must blame Zanu-PF. If we're talking of mismanagement, we must blame Zanu-PF, and rightly so too. But if we're talking of implementing reforms to stop Zanu-PF rigging the elections, we have to blame the opposition, because Zanu-PF is never going to implement reforms to reform itself out of power. That we have established by the mid-1990s. That is why the people of Zimbabwe have been voting for the opposition, risking life and limb to vote for the opposition so that they would implement those reforms. If they knew Zanu-PF was going to do it, why have you been risking your life to elect the opposition? I think the mentality that I support a party and the leader is infallible is undemocratic, and it is the root of why Zimbabwe is a failed state. Whether we like it or not, the opposition did fail to implement the reforms. And by failing to implement the reforms, they've allowed Zanu-PF to continue in power. Right now, the opposition is not interested in reforms. They are interested in the few gravy train seats that they know Zanu-PF would give them if they participate in those flawed elections. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining me tonight, and I hope we'll discuss this issue. We, the people of Zimbabwe, must find a way out of this mess, because nobody else is going to do so for us. And we need to open up our minds and stop having this blinkered mentality that my leader is untouchable. Nobody is untouchable. If I've said a lie, you should tell me what the lie is. But I believe it is a fundamental truth that the opposition sold out on reforms. And right now we need a competent opposition who will focus on those reforms if the country is to get out of this mess. Again, thank you very much, everybody, and good night.